In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to connect Ignition to SQL Server. Now, before I attempt to create a new database connection in Ignition, there are a couple of configuration changes that I need to make in SQL Server. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open up this SQL Server Configuration Manager. In Windows, you can just click on the Start menu and start typing SQL Server Configuration Manager, and this should appear in the list. Once you have this open, the first area you're going to want to take a look at is the SQL Server Services. And when you're here, you're going to want to make sure that the SQL Server browser is up and running. This is basically one of the mechanisms that allows Ignition to connect to SQL Server. So if it says it's running, you're in a good state. If not, then we need to actually make sure it's running. So you can actually just right-click and tell it to start. Now, in a production environment, you're most likely going to want this SQL Server browser to start up automatically whenever the computer starts. So you're going to want to make sure the start mode says automatic. So if yours doesn't, what you can do is you can come down on this right-click menu here, select Properties, and on this window here, come over to the Service tab, find the Start mode, and change it to Automatic. And then you can go ahead and click OK. I'm just going to X out since mine's already set up. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is you want to come down to this SQL Server Network Configuration section here, and there should be a protocols for and then some instance name. Whatever instance name you chose when you're installing SQL Server, that's what will be listed here. I didn't change mine, so I'm using SQL Express, so this is the default instance name for SQL Express. You want to make sure that when this is selected, this TCP/IP protocol name is enabled. By default, it's set to disabled, so all you have to do is you can just double-click or you can right-click and enable. Now, if you make a change to this, you can see a little message appear here saying that you need to restart SQL Server for the change to take effect. So that's easy enough to do. You can restart SQL Server however you like. The easiest way is probably just from the same window. If you head back to SQL Server Services, this guy here, and you see that's my instance name here, the SQL Server item. This is my SQL Server instance, so I could actually just right-click and restart here if I need to. But once you've restarted that, you get your TCP/IP enabled. You have both of these services running. You don't need SQL Server Agent to run. That can be stopped. That's all we have to do from here. So I'm going to minimize this Configuration Manager window. And let's go ahead and create the database connection. So I'm back here on my gateway, and I'm in the Configure section. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit. You can see I'm under Databases and Connections. I'm going to create a new database connection by clicking on this link here. We'll scroll down the list of drivers here. I'll select the Microsoft SQL Server JDBC driver, and I'll click Next. Let's go ahead and give this new connection a name here. So I'll just call mine SQL Server, just like that. And scroll down a little bit here. We need to go ahead and specify a connect URL. So we have to tell Ignition where the database is. Now I have Ignition and SQL Server installed on the same computer, so I can leave the host name parameter here alone. I could type in an IP address or host name, but localhost works just fine. And with SQL Server's JDBC driver, we actually have an option for the rest of the parameters here. So I could either use the instance name, or I could use the port instead. If you wanted to use the port, all you have to do is select the default instance name and / that's listed on the property here. Hit delete or backspace, whichever you prefer. Type colon and then whatever port SQL Server is running on. In most cases, it's port 1433, unless you've changed it during the installation process. Once you're done, it should look something like this. Now, I actually want to use my instance name here, so I'm going to go ahead and just select that colon. I'm going to select the 1433 there, hit delete, and I'll type / and my instance name, as you saw earlier, it was SQL Express, all caps, just like this. So that's all we have to do for the connect URL. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit more here, and we have to specify a username and password. Because we're using SQL Server, we actually have an option here. So the simplest option, the one I'm going to do in this video here, involves passing a username and a password in here. So this is called SQL authentication. So we're going to go ahead and authenticate directly against the database. You can just type in a user that's configured into the database. So in my case, I'm going to use SA and their password, check that. So this would be SQL authentication. There's also Windows authentication. Windows authentication is usually preferable and more secure. This basically means that the username and password used to connect comes from Ignition's Windows Service logon. This typically involves setting the Ignition service to run as a certain user instead of as system. To use Windows authentication, you actually don't have to type anything in here. You don't have to type in the username or password at all. Instead, what you do is you come down to this extra connection properties section, leave the database name alone, just come over here to the end, place a semicolon down, and I'm going to paste this in, but you just want to type this out. Integrated security equals true, spelt just like this, capitalization and all. Now there's actually a little bit more to Windows authentication. There's an additional DLL file you need to download and place into Ignition's installation directory. For more details, take a look at the Connecting to Microsoft SQL Server page in the Ignition user manual. Now like I said, I'm going to use SQL authentication, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this extra line here. I'm going to leave it just as the database name, and as if you probably tell, this little under extra connection properties here, this database name specifies which of the databases within SQL Server this connection should connect to. So I'm not going to make any other changes. I'm going to scroll on down all the way to the bottom of this page, and we can click this Create New Database Connection button. And that's it. I got a valid status, so I'm good. We're done. Now, of course, if you're seeing a fault message at all, take a look at this database connection status page here. You'll find any errors returned by the database as a result of the configuration we just attempted, and that should be a pretty good start for troubleshooting.